There are names a man trusts with his life, and then there is the one he trusts with everything else. His signature, sealed onto paper, he never reads twice. August Hollis had signed 100 such papers that year. None of them had cost him anything. This one would cost him almost everything. Presidio caught the last light, copper on the dust, gold on the tin roofs. The heat had thinned, but not left. It never fully left in July. It just went quiet, waiting on the dark to try again. Hollis nailed the fresh bundle of notices to the board outside the land office. A Tuesday habit, nothing more. He peeled back the top sheet and smoothed it flat with his thumb. Read the word "wanted" before he read anything under it. Then he read the rest. By order of Ranger A. Hollis. His own name stamped black under a face he had kissed that same morning. 3 steps away, on the boardwalk, Clementine stood with a basket of mending against her hip. She did not move either. The basket handle creaked once in her grip, then went still. Nothing else moved. Down the street, a dog barked twice and gave up. Then quiet. Nobody else on that block knew enough yet to be afraid. How many ways can a man's name betray him? August Hollis was about to learn there was no ceiling on the number. You have trusted your name to someone before. A doctor, a bank, a stranger at the door with papers to sign. Hollis was about to learn how easily that trust gets lifted out of a man's hands and turned into a weapon against the one person he swore to protect. To understand how the two of them froze on that street, you have to go back 6 weeks. Presidio, 6 weeks earlier, was a smaller kind of trouble. Hollis had buried his wife that spring and never got around to grieving her right. There was a boy to raise, a badge that cared for neither of them. Otis was 7. The house had lost half its noise, and the boy had gone quiet along with it. Some nights he still set 2 plates at supper, then put the second one back before his father could notice. Hollis noticed anyway. It was the noticing that kept him up past midnight, oiling a gun that didn't need it. The cupboard by the stove still smelled faintly of her soap under the wood smoke. Hollis had stopped opening it, not on purpose. His hand just learned to reach for the other one instead. A ranger's district didn't shrink because a man was tired. Hollis rode it anyway, badge heavy on a shirt gone thin at the collar, and came home most nights to a boy old enough to ask why the coffee never tasted right, and young enough to still expect an answer. He answered the bride notice like a man patches a roof before the rain. Not for comfort, for necessity. Someone to keep the house standing, the boy fed, the badge respectable enough that no captain in Austin could say Hollis had let himself go to seed. 4 lines, his name at the bottom, sealed and sent before he'd read it back even once. At the time, it felt like the least important letter he'd ever mailed. Her answer came 3 weeks later, short and plain. No flourish he could find fault with. She signed her name as Clementine Ashford, gave her age 37 without being asked, said she could cook, sew, keep a ledger, and that she wasn't looking for romance, only a roof that didn't leak and a purpose worth getting up for. Hollis read it twice. For him, that counted as sentiment. Then he wrote back a date. The stage came in on a Tuesday, dust-caked, 2 hours behind. Hollis stood at the platform with Otis's hand swallowed up in his own, both of them scrubbed and uncomfortable in their good shirts. Half the porch had found some errand that put them within eye shot of the platform. Presidio was not a big enough town to mind its own business, and everyone knew it. When the door opened, the woman who stepped down didn't look for him first. She looked at the town, the length of the street, the shape of the church steeple, the line of the river beyond it. She measured the place before she measured the man selling it. She was handsome in a worn, deliberate way, dark hair pinned tight enough to survive the ride, one carpetbag held close, no porter out here to hand it to. When her eyes found Hollis at last, she measured him too. Quick, thorough. Only then did she offer her hand. Mr. Hollis. Not a question. A fact she was confirming. Ma'am. He took the bag before she could argue, felt the weight of it, too heavy for clothes alone, he thought, and set the thought aside before it could turn into a question. Otis studied her with the flat honesty only children manage. You don't look like the picture Pa drew in his head, he said. Clementine's mouth twitched, almost a smile, gone before it could commit to being one. Nobody ever does, she said. They started toward the wagon. Otis stopped first, tugging her sleeve toward the old mission bell, and in that pause, while Hollis loaded the bag, Clementine's gaze drifted past the rooftops to the far rise above the river, where a broken shape of adobe walls caught the last gold light. The ruin the old-timers still called Fort Leaton, half swallowed by mesquite and 40 years of neglect. She didn't ask what it was. She already knew. Her hand found the strap of her bag hanging now from Hollis's shoulder and closed around it, tight enough for one instant to whiten her knuckles. Then she let go, smoothed her skirt, and turned back toward the wagon as if nothing in her had moved at all. August Hollis, 3 feet away, hat still in his hand, saw none of it. He had no way of knowing yet that his new wife hadn't come to Presidio for him. She'd come for the ruin on the hill, and for whatever it still kept buried inside its walls. The wedding took 11 minutes. Judge Elkanah Bram read the words fast, the way he read anything that wasn't a sentence he cared about. 2 witnesses stood in from the mercantile, pulled off the street for the occasion, still holding their parcels. Otis stood between them, scrubbed pink, watching his father's hands instead of the bride. Hollis signed the register first. Clementine signed second. Her hand didn't shake. She wrote her name the way a clerk closes a ledger at month's end. No flourish in it, just the plain business of making a thing official. That's it? Otis whispered. That's it, Hollis said. No supper after, no dancing, no fiddle, no rice thrown by anyone who'd bothered to buy it. Just the wagon home, the long orange light lying flat across the road, and a silence none of the 3 minded filling with the creak of the axle and the boy's boots swinging loose against the boards. She had the house sorted inside a week, not rearranged, corrected. The flour bin moved 6 inches off the damp wall. The lamp wick trimmed properly for the first time since spring. The screen door hinge greased. Before Hollis had even registered it squeaked. Otis's second plate, the one he still set out of habit and then quietly took back, she never once mentioned. She just started filling it, as though the boy had always eaten for 2. Hollis watched all of it from the edge of rooms, the way he watched weather building over the ridge. Worth noting, not yet his to manage. He told himself the badge kept him too many miles from home to ask questions about a wife who ran a house better than he ever had. For a while, that answer held. The mending basket is what broke it. He found the basket on the porch one evening, her needle stopped mid-stitch in a shirt of his. Beside it lay a county land plat, old and creased soft, the kind the courthouse kept in a cabinet nobody bothered to dust. She hadn't hidden it. She'd simply forgotten he came home early on Thursdays, patrol cut short by a horse gone lame at the crossing. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "Borrowed it." She folded the plat once, unhurried, and tucked it under the mending needle first. "I like knowing the ground I'm standing on." Fair answer, not the one he'd asked for. "Most folks learn that by walking it," he said, "not by courthouse paper." "I like paper." She threaded the needle again, eyes down. "Paper doesn't change its mind." She smiled when she'd said it. Small, gone before it finished arriving. Then she went back to her stitch, and Hollis let the matter drop. The way a man drops a stone he's decided isn't worth the throw. But she kept borrowing paper. A ledger from the land office one week. Back issues of the county register the next. Once a surveyor's notebook, returned to its shelf before he'd even clocked it missing. Always some errand hung on the front of it. Thread, coffee, a letter to post. And always buried in that same afternoon, an hour spent bent over documents that had nothing to do with any of it. Her questions came careful, a little at a time. Never enough at once to notice, never quite enough to grow suspicious on its own. "Does the district keep every warrant it's ever filed?" she asked once over supper, not looking up from Otis's plate. 20 years back, near enough. Even the old ones, from before your time here. Even those. He watched her cut the boy's meat smaller than it needed cutting. Why? No reason. She handed Otis his fork. "I like knowing where things are kept." Same answer, worn to a different shape. Hollis noticed it this time. A fence post standing a half-inch off true. Nothing broken, nothing worth riding out for. But noticed and set aside where a man keeps what he isn't ready to ask twice. She never once mentioned Fort Leaton, not the ruin on the rise, not the acequia running low under its walls, not any father's name. Hollis didn't yet know there was a father's name to withhold. He only knew his wife could read a land plat the way most women read scripture, for comfort and for something underneath the comfort she wasn't saying out loud. He woke past midnight, 2 weeks into the marriage, to a house gone half empty beside him. Her side of the bed had cooled. She'd been gone some while. Hollis lay still a moment, listening. Old habit, older than the badge. Then he caught it. Faint, under the usual creak of the house settling, a drawer easing shut somewhere below. He found her in his own office. One candle burned low on the desk. His cabinet of old district papers stood open at her knee, warrants pulled loose and stacked by date across the floorboards. Her finger moved down a column of names in a ledger he hadn't touched since the spring before Otis was born. She didn't hear him in the doorway. For one full breath, neither of them moved. Him watching from the dark hall, her reading by candlelight. The flame threw her shadow twice her size across his own handwriting on the wall behind her. Then the floor spoke under his boot. Her head came up fast. The candle guttered with the sudden turn of air, and whatever she'd been about to find stayed exactly where it was. One page still under her hand, and one question sitting in his mouth that neither of them was ready yet to ask out loud. Neither of them moved first. The candle guttered, steadied, and in its small, steady light, Clementine closed the ledger under her hand. Slow, deliberate, no sound in it at all. She didn't offer the page. He didn't ask for it. Couldn't sleep, she said. Not a lie, not the whole truth either. Neither could I. He believed himself when he said it. He carried the candle back to bed for her. She followed 2 steps behind, and the question stayed where it had landed. In his mouth, unspoken, growing a little heavier each night, he chose not to lift it. 3 weeks passed that way, small ones mostly. Otis took to following her like a second shadow. He held the pins while she hemmed his father's shirt, dropped half of them, found them all again on his knees under the table. She never once told him to hurry. "Ma taught me a stitch," he announced one evening, needle wobbling in his fist. "Want to see?" "Show me." He did, badly. She fixed 3 stitches out of 10 and praised the other 7 like they'd been sewn by a tailor. Hollis watched from the doorway, unnoticed, and felt something in his chest unclench that he hadn't known was clenched. He stopped counting the days by how far they still were from strangers. He started counting them by what she'd fixed. The hinge, the wick, the boy's second plate, filled now without a word from anyone. A man could get used to a house running smooth. Hollis did, faster than he meant to. He noticed it most in small hours, coming off patrol, boots still gray with road dust, and finding supper already warm instead of waiting cold on the stove the way it had every night since the spring he buried his first wife. He noticed it in Otis, who laughed now at supper, actual laughing, not the polite scrap of it he'd rationed out all winter. Hollis stopped bracing himself at the door each evening. He started just walking through it. He told himself the badge had earned him this much peace. He didn't examine the thought too hard. A man rarely does, when the peace tastes that good. The torn page turned up on a Tuesday, tucked in the mending basket where Otis went hunting for a spare button. He pulled it out with the button still in his fist, more interested in the paper than the thread. "What's this one, Pa?" Hollis took it. Half a land plat, the corner ragged where it had been torn rather than cut, ink faded to the color of weak tea. A survey line ran across it, and at the bottom, cut clean off by the tear, the ghost of a name, just enough letters standing to read ASHF. He turned it over, nothing on the back. He set it on the mantel, meaning to ask her about it that night. Supper came. Otis needed help with his sums. By the time the lamp went dark, the question had gone dark with it. She didn't forget. He caught her 2 days later, searching the mantel with her eyes, before she'd said a word of greeting. Her shoulders came down half an inch when she found it still there. "Losing something?" he asked. "Just tidying in my head." She picked up the page, folded it once, and slid it into her apron pocket like it belonged there and always had. Old habit. Counting what's where. Fair answer, worn thin in the same place as the last one. She didn't leave it in the apron after that. Hollis saw it once more, days later, pressed flat inside her Bible on the nightstand, marking a page she never seemed to read. He didn't touch it. He only marked where it had moved to, a fresh print, nothing more, not yet worth following. The district ledger gave him the second piece, and he wasn't even looking for it. Hollis had pulled the book down, hunting a boundary dispute 2 ranches over. Nothing to do with her, nothing to do with anything but a fence line and a bad-tempered neighbor. He ran his finger down the column of names from 4 years back, found the ranch he needed, and kept his finger moving out of habit alone. Ashford, A. 2 lines below the one he wanted, a water claim. filed and then crossed through in different ink, like someone had come back later and struck it dead. He sat with his finger on the name longer than the fence line deserved. It could be nothing. Presidio had buried more Ashfords than most towns had residents. A common enough name, the kind that turned up in every ledger from here to Austin. But his wife's maiden name sat in his mouth before he'd decided to taste it, and he closed the book before he could talk himself into asking why. That night at supper, he almost asked anyway. "You ever hear of an Ashford claim out past the fort?" he said, watching her ladle stew instead of watching her face. "Water rights, old one." Her hand didn't shake. The ladle kept moving, steady as a clock. "Common name," she said. "I've heard it plenty of places." "Didn't say it was you." "No." She set his bowl down first, then Otis's, then her own. "You didn't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the kind that both of them filled on purpose, looking anywhere but at each other. Otis blowing on his spoon, the lamp hissing low on its wick, the clock in the front room counting seconds neither of them needed counted. Hollis let it go, not because the itch had stopped, because some part of him, the part that had buried a wife and raised a boy alone through 2 winters, had decided he'd rather keep the peace at his own table than win an answer he wasn't sure he could carry. He told himself that was patience. It felt some nights closer to fear. The rider came in on a lathered horse 2 mornings later, dust to the eyebrows, official pouch strapped tight across his chest. Ranger Hollis. He didn't dismount. New notices coming up from the circuit judge's office. Full batch, countywide, ought to reach you by week's end. Notices for what? Same as always, whatever the district's owed. The rider was already turning his horse. "Bram wants 'em posted fast this round. Says there's one in the stack he's particular about." Hollis stood in the yard a long moment after the dust settled, hat in hand, the torn land plat still folded somewhere in his wife's apron pocket, and a name in a dead ledger he hadn't asked her about twice. He didn't know yet which notice the judge meant. He would before the week was out, and so would she. The bundle reached the land office on a Tuesday, same as every week Hollis had worn the badge. Notices posted first thing, rain or a drought, a small ritual nobody in Presidio thought twice about. He didn't think twice about it either. That was his mistake. He peeled back the top sheet the way he peeled back every top sheet. Thumb flat, no ceremony in it. 3 years of the same motion, worn smooth, wanted. His own name stamped in black beneath a face he had kissed that same morning. 3 steps away on the boardwalk, Clementine's basket went still against her hip. Neither of them moved. Down the street, a dog barked twice and gave up. Nobody else on the block knew enough yet to be afraid. The heat pressed in close, the way it always did before it broke. Hollis felt none of it. He did the only thing his hands remembered how to do with paper that had gone wrong in them. He folded it. Once, along the crease, the bundle had already worn soft. Once more, against the grain, until the face inside it was small enough to close a fist around. Is it true? Not a question. He hadn't asked her a real one since the platform. Clementine set the basket down on the boardwalk rail. Slow, both hands. She didn't let go of the handle until it had gone still under her palm. Which part? Start with my name on it. Barnabus Teague wrote that part. Plain, no tremor she let him hear. He needed a signature nobody in this county would question. Yours was the only one that qualified. Across the street, the mercantile curtain shifted an inch and held. Two riders reined up outside the saloon and didn't go in. Presidio was already watching, the way it watched everything, and neither of them had the luxury of pretending otherwise. A ranger's wife, 3 steps from a ranger's own warrant. That was a story that would outrun both of them by supper. My father filed a water claim on the acequia below Fort Leaton 4 years back, she said. Ambrose Ashford. You found his name in your own ledger a week ago and didn't ask me about it twice. I remember the name. He died defending that filing. The county called it the river rising early and taking him off the bank. Her voice didn't climb. It went flatter instead, the way a wound goes numb before it goes quiet. I call it Barnabus Teague. He wanted those water rights bad enough to sign a dead man's claim over to a cattle syndicate the week after the funeral. Nobody in this county asks a land agent hard questions. So he borrowed a ranger's name to ask them for him. Stamped a warrant saying I'd falsified my own father's filing, obstructed its lawful transfer. Easier to erase a grieving daughter than answer for a body in the river. She said it without a single tear in it, and that, more than any of the facts, was what convinced him. Grief, this old didn't cry anymore. It just kept ledgers. Judge Bram signs whatever paper carries a ranger's seal, Hollis said slowly, working it through out loud. Never questions it, never has to. You taught me that yourself. My first week here wasn't meant as a warning, but I took it as one. Clementine's mouth went thin. Teague only had to borrow your name once. After that, the system did the rest of the work for him. Hollis turned the folded paper over once in his palm and said nothing. It was, she noted, exactly what he'd done with the land plat 2 weeks before. Turned it, found nothing on the back, set the question aside for later. She'd learned that much about her husband already. Why my district, he said finally, out of every ranger taking bride notices between here and Austin. Because you were close enough to the original filing to still have the paper trail Teague hadn't gotten around to burning yet. She met his eyes for the first time since the boardwalk. And because a ranger's own house is the last place anyone thinks to search for the woman his name is hunting. So the notice, the wedding, Otis. Each word came out flatter than the last, a man laying bricks he didn't want to lay. All of it, a door you needed opened. I didn't marry a stranger. She didn't look away from that either. I married the only name that could still save mine. It should have sounded cold, said like that on a public street with the light going copper and half the town pretending not to watch through curtains. It didn't. It sounded like the truest thing she'd told him since the platform. That, more than the warrant, more than her father's name in a dead ledger, was what took the ground out from under him. He thought of the boy at home, laughing now at supper, actual laughing. He thought of a badge that had never once in 19 years been turned against him instead of for him. You should have told me, he said, before the ring, before any of it. Would you have believed a stranger over your own signature? She asked it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. I needed you married to me before I needed you to believe me, in that order. It was the only order that worked. He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer sitting anywhere close enough to reach. Hollis walked her home the long way around the plaza, though the short way would have served just as well. neither of them said so out loud. Boots on hard-packed dirt, then boardwalk, then dirt again. The folded warrant stayed shut in his fist the whole way, past every curtain in Presidio that had found a reason to be near a window that evening. The light kept dying at the edges, copper, going to ash. Otis met them at the gate, Sum's book still under one arm, chalk dust on his thumb. He looked from his father's face to hers and back again, and whatever he read there made him forget the question he'd been chewing all afternoon. He just fell in step beside Clementine instead, quiet, and reached up for her hand the way he'd taken to doing without being told to. Hollis watched that small hand find hers and said nothing about it. He didn't put her in the jail cell. He told himself that mattered. Some part of him even believed it. But at the house, for the first time since she'd stepped off that stage, he turned the key in the outer door from the inside. The lock his first wife had put in 11 years back, and nobody had ever once used. "Why are you locking it?" Clementine said. She hadn't moved toward the bedroom yet. "Because I don't know yet what's true." Hollis pocketed the key instead of hanging it on its nail. "Until I do, I'd rather be the one holding this." Hollis didn't sleep. He sat instead at the office desk past midnight, the cabinet of old warrants open at his knee, same as she'd left it weeks before. Same candle stub, same low light. He hadn't planned the symmetry, it found him anyway. He pulled every notice he'd signed that year. 100, near enough. Routine papers, stock language, his own name at the bottom of each. Livestock disputes, boundary fines, 2 horse thieves out past the crossing. He laid them flat across the desk, one by one, and studied his own hand like it belonged to a stranger. Most of it matched. The slant, the heavy cross on the T, the way his pen dragged on the last letter of Hollis, always a little, like the name itself was tired of being written. 3 didn't match. Small things, a loop too round on the H, a cross that landed too high, too careful, the mark of someone copying a habit instead of owning one. He set those 3 aside from the rest and stared at them until the candle burned down another inch. Clerks copied warrants all the time. County business ran on it. A ranger signed the original. A clerk squared the copies for the circuit judge's file. Nobody thought twice. Teague had sat 2 desks from the land office clerk for 6 years. Close enough to learn a signature. Close enough to borrow it once too often. He thought of every routine paper he'd ever signed at this desk. Fast, supper waiting, Otis underfoot. A man could sign 100 small lies that way and never once feel their weight land. Hollis folded the 3 papers together and put them in his coat, not the cabinet. Then he went to bed and lay there a long while listening to Clementine breathe and didn't wake her to say what he'd found. The house settled into something neither of them named. She still locked nothing. He still turned the outer key each night, pocketed it instead of hanging it on the nail. But he took to leaving the bedroom door open, and that, in a house this quiet, counted as a kind of answer. Mornings came back first. Coffee that tasted right again. Otis at the table, Sum's book open, chalk dust already on his thumb, before breakfast finished. Clementine moved through the kitchen the way she always had, sure-handed, but Hollis noticed now what he hadn't let himself notice before, how her eyes went to the door every time it opened quick and away again before anyone could catch her at it. He caught her at it anyway, didn't say so. The folded warrant stayed on the front room table where he'd set it that first night, and neither of them moved it, not into a drawer, not into the stove, where 3 matches could have ended the whole question in under a minute. It sat there through supper, through Otis's sums, through the mending basket coming out each evening and going back in. A closed fist of paper between 2 people trying to decide what to do with an open hand. "You could burn it," Clementine said one evening, not looking up from her stitching. "Might be simpler." Might be. Hollis didn't reach for it. Simple's not the same as true. She let the needle rest a moment. "No, it isn't." That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Otis climbed into her lap uninvited 2 nights later, sleepy, sums abandoned halfway through a column of 7s, and she let him stay there working the last of it against her arm instead of the table. Hollis watched from the doorway. Something in his chest tried to unclench again. He let it, just a little, not all the way. He went back to the archive twice more that week. Alone, after she'd banked the stove and gone up, cross-checked the 3 odd signatures against every clerk's ledger the county kept, hunting the hand that had practiced his own until it nearly passed. He found Teague's name signed plain and open on a dozen land filings from that same season. No disguise needed there. An agent's business was his own name. But the letters leaned the same wrong way as the counterfeit H's. A man's hand doesn't change character between an honest signature and a stolen one. It only changes whose name it's wearing. He didn't tell her what he'd found, not yet. He told himself he was waiting for certainty. Some nights, it felt closer to waiting for courage. Wednesday put him across the counter from Teague, over a boundary filing that had sat ignored 3 weeks. Teague smiled first, quick and practiced, a smile that never quite climbed past his teeth. "Ranger, married life suits you. County's been saying so." "County talks a lot." "It does." Teague squared a stack of papers that hadn't needed squaring. "Hear your wife keeps a fine house, keeps herself to herself, too, from what folks tell me. Careful woman." "She is that." "Careful women interest me, Ranger, in my line of work." The smile held one beat too long before it let go. A man never knows what a careful woman's being careful about. Hollis said nothing to that. He signed the filing, plain, no flourish, and set the pen down exactly where Teague's hand had been resting. Close enough that Teague drew his fingers back without seeming to notice he had. A pen moved 6 inches across a counter, that was all. It was the first time in the whole conversation that Barnabus Teague had looked for even a second like a man deciding whether to run. Thursday brought a rider into the yard at noon, horse blown hard, dust thick enough to whiten his hat brim. "Ranger Hollis." The man didn't dismount, didn't ask leave to speak either. "Word's come down from the county line. Teague's been asking after a woman." Hollis set down the tack he'd been oiling. "Asking where?" "Everywhere. Saloon, mercantile, church steps Sunday." The rider's eyes cut once toward the house, toward the porch, where a basket of mending sat half-finished in the afternoon light. "Asking real particular about a fugitive he says is being sheltered right here. Says it plain now. Says your name when he says it." Behind Hollis, the screen door hinge, greased weeks ago, silent ever since, creaked once. Clementine stood in the frame, basket still in her hands, and neither of them said a word for the length of time it took the rider's horse to shift its weight and settle again. The rider touched his hat and turned the animal, in no hurry now, his errand delivered. He didn't need an answer. He already had one, just from watching the two of them stand there not giving him one. The whole district already knew. Captain Josiah Pruett rode in at noon and didn't get down from the horse. Rangers who meant business rarely did. He looked at the house first, then at Hollis, standing in the yard with a bridle still in his hand. Heard talk from the county line to here, twice over. Rangers got a fugitive keeping his house. She's my wife. She's a name on a warrant with your signature under it. Pruett's voice stayed level, flat, the kind of calm a man earns delivering worse news than this and sleeping fine after. Doesn't much matter to Austin which one she is first. The warrant's forged, says the husband. Pruett let that sit. Judge Brams had 3 men in his office this week asking why a ranger's badge is protecting the very woman it's meant to bring in. I can hold that line a few more days, not much longer, not with your name tangled in it this deep. He never raised his voice. Didn't need to. There's a boy in that house, too, he said, quieter now. Whatever happens to your standing happens to his. Think on that before you think on anything else. He turned the horse without waiting on an answer. That was Pruett's way. He never asked a question he wasn't prepared to leave hanging. Hollis stood in the yard a long while after the dust settled. The yard stayed quiet. Otis came home from the schoolhouse an hour later. Torn sleeve, a jaw set too hard for 7 years old. He wouldn't say what happened. He didn't have to. Clementine found the answer in the dirt worked deep under his fingernails. A boy who'd been in a fight, lost most of it on purpose, so nobody could say he hadn't swung first. They said Ma's a thief, he told his father at supper, not looking up from his plate. I told them she isn't. What did they say back? That Pa's the one who signed the paper saying she was. Hollis had no answer for that. He sat with it long after Otis had gone to bed, the torn sleeve still draped over the mending basket, waiting on hands that hadn't decided yet whether they'd mend it. He walked her to the jail himself after dark, so the street wouldn't see. For your protection, he said, key already in his hand. From what? She didn't fight him. That was worse than if she had. Teague's men or the county's opinion of me? Both. You could just say you're not sure yet. Her voice stayed even too. She'd learned that somewhere, maybe from watching him. It would cost you less than a lie dressed up as care. He didn't answer. He turned the key instead, the same hand that had turned it on their own front door 2 weeks before, and the sound it made in the empty jailhouse was smaller than he expected and heavier than he was ready to carry. He stood outside the bars a moment after the lock caught. A law with my name on it ought to mean somebody's safe. He said it low, half to the empty room. Nobody else was awake in the house to hear it. Not somebody's caught. Clementine didn't answer that. She'd already turned toward the cot, back straight, and let him keep the silence instead. The only thing left in that room still hers to give or withhold. He left without the answer he'd come hoping for. She didn't sleep. The cell held a cot, a tin cup, a window too high to see through unless she stood on the cot itself. She did, once, to watch the last light go out of Presidio's rooftops. Copper, then gray, then nothing. She'd watched that same color drain out of a sky before, the night the county told her a river had taken her father. She'd believed them for exactly 4 days. She didn't plan to spend 4 days believing anything this time. By midnight, she'd worked it plain in her head. The cot creaked under her, the only sound in the building besides her own breath. If Hollis came at dawn with an apology and nothing else, she'd take the apology and go to Fort Leaton without him. She still knew where Ambrose Ashford had kept the original filing, the one Teague's copy never quite matched. She'd known it since she was 9, walking the acequia at her father's side, learning each marker the day he first pointed it out. None of them had left her since. She didn't need a ranger's badge to read her own father's ledger. She needed daylight and the nerve to walk there alone if nobody walked with her. She closed her eyes on that thought and let it hold her instead of sleep. Hollis didn't sleep either. He sat at the office desk with the 3 mismatched warrants still folded in his coat and the district ledger open to a page he'd already read 4 times. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, he stopped pretending he was studying handwriting. He admitted to no one that he was only sitting up because the house felt wrong with the cell full and the bed empty beside where he lay. He thought of Pruett's line about Austin. He thought of Otis's torn sleeve. He thought less as the hours wore down about whether the county would forgive him for what he'd done, and more about whether he could forgive himself for calling it mercy while he did it. By first light, he'd stopped calling it that. He rode out before the sun cleared the ridge, alone. He came back with the sun full up, a leather folder under his arm. The original 1884 filing, pulled from the ruin at Fort Leaton, exactly where she'd said her father kept it. Water-stained, whole. The ink still held its shape after 2 years buried in adobe and dust. He unlocked the cell himself. No deputy watching. No one to see whether his hand shook on the key. They did. A little. "I found it," he said, and held the folder up so she could see the seal was real before she said a word. Clementine looked at the folder a long moment, then at him. "You should have found it before you locked the door," she said, "not after." She stepped past him into the morning light without waiting for him to answer that, and didn't take his arm on the way out. The walk from the jailhouse to the plaza took 4 minutes. Neither of them spoke, not once. Clementine carried nothing but the dress she'd slept in. Hollis carried more. The leather folder under one arm, folded small in his coat pocket, the warrant that had started all of it, soft at every crease now from a week of being carried, unfolded, refolded, and carried again. The plaza was already gathering by the time they reached the land office steps. Word moved faster than a ranger could ride. Presidio had had all night to hear it. Barnabus Teague stood at the counter inside, pen already dipped, a transfer deed spread flat under his hand. Judge Elkanah Bram sat behind the rail in his circuit coat, half asleep, until the door opened, and stayed that way only another second. "Ranger." Teague didn't look up from the pen. "Little early for county business." "Not for this business." Hollis set the leather folder on the counter, careful, a man setting down something he'd carried a long way and didn't want to drop now. Ambrose Ashford's original filing on the Acequia Madre, 1884, water-stained, whole. Teague's pen stopped, just for a second, long enough. "That filing's been lost 4 years," he said. County records are wrong, or somebody made them that way." Hollis unfolded the wanted poster next to the deed and smoothed it flat with his thumb. The same motion he'd used on 100 routine papers that never cost him anything. This one had. "Read the name at the bottom of this warrant, Judge. Then read the name at the bottom of that filing. Tell me if the same hand wrote both." Bram took his time. 30 years on the circuit had taught him a courtroom silence carries further than its noise. He held the two papers side by side under the window light. Turn them once, turn them again. "The H leans wrong," he said finally. "Every warrant Ranger Hollis has filed with this county, the H leans the other way. This one's a copy of a copy. Somebody learned the shape of his name without ever learning the habit of it." "I can explain that," Teague said. "Too fast. Explain the stamp while you're at it." Hollis laid 3 more warrants from his coat beside the first, the ones he'd pulled from his own cabinet, the ones that hadn't matched either. 3 routine filings this year, my name on all of them, none of it my hand. Everyone crossed your desk before it crossed the courthouse. 6 years, sitting 2 chairs from the copying clerk, taught you how a ranger signs his name. It never taught you why he signs it. The plaza had gone quiet enough to hear the deed paper shift under Teague's own hand. A law with a ranger's name on it is supposed to mean somebody's protected. Hollis kept his voice low. He didn't need it any louder. Not somebody sold out of house and water so a man could put a syndicate's brand on another family's ditch. Teague didn't run. Nowhere in that plaza to run to. Something in his face knew it before anyone told him. He set the pen down. Careful! Ink still wet on the deed he'd never finished signing. 4 years, Barnabus Teague had trusted paper as his weapon. Watching it turn in another man's hand cost him more than the water rights ever had. He didn't fight the badge. He just went quiet and smaller and let the pen lie where it had fallen. Judge Bram didn't need a jury for the rest of it. He stripped the land agent's license on the spot, right there at the rail, in front of half of Presidio, and both watermarkers Clementine had walked at her father's side since she was 9 years old. The transfer deed never left the counter. It went into evidence instead, filed beside the forged warrant and 3 counterfeit signatures that would outlast Barnabus Teague's standing in that county by a long stretch. The charge against Clementine Ashford was struck from the docket before noon. The Acequia Madre went back to the name it had always belonged to, hers, her father's, the family that had dug it by hand 2 generations back and never once sold water. It didn't have the right to sell. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of town, but the mercantile curtain that had watched them all week finally opened the rest of the way and stayed there. They walked home together, the long way around the plaza again, though there was no reason left to take it slow. Otis saw them first. He ran, straight past his father into Clementine, Sum's book forgotten somewhere behind him. She caught him without breaking stride, the same steadiness she'd carried since the day she stepped off that stage. Supper that night was quiet, the kind that comes after a storm passes, not before one arrives. Later, on the porch, the evening came down copper again, same as it had the day the poster first went up. Neither of them froze at it this time. Hollis sat with his hat off. Clementine sat beside him. The folded warrant was gone now, burned that afternoon in the kitchen stove, the one place it had never once been put in 2 weeks of sitting on the front room table. He didn't reach for her hand. 2 weeks of a locked door didn't undo themselves over one clean morning at the land office, and both of them knew better than to pretend otherwise. But her hand came to rest on the porch table beside his, instead of folded in her lap, close enough that the backs of their fingers nearly touched. She didn't pull it back when he noticed. That was all. It was enough for one evening. A name, Hollis thought, watching the light go from copper to gray over the river he'd ridden 19 years, was only ever worth what the hand that carried it was willing to defend. He'd learned that the hard way. A woman's face on his own warrant. A cell door he'd have given a great deal to unlock one day sooner than he had. Would you have opened that door in the first hour, or only after a whole night convinced you? Hollis still isn't sure he knows his own answer.